everyone and welcome back. This is Mindy Egan for Lawnfawn, and in today's video we are going to be doing some no-line coloring. For today's card, I'm going to be using the stamp set Our Friendship Grows, and I'm going to be stamping them in the Jellyfish ink, which is Copic friendly. It is a very, very light ink. Now, no-line coloring is really exactly what it is. It gives the appearance that there are no lines. So when I'm stamping this down, you'll be able to notice that you can barely see it on the white cardstock. The great thing about this, especially if you're using a stamping tool, is you can stamp it numerous times to darken up that line as much as you want. And then as we color over it, those lines will kind of disappear. So I stamped mine 3 times, and I also stamped a few more sunflowers. Now I have leaves on there, but I didn't end up using the leaves. Now I am going to color this just as I would if there were black lines. Sometimes it also helps to stamp the images in black ink and just kind of have that off on the side. That might actually help you a little bit if your image is really detailed. I picked these sunflowers because it's pretty open. I mean, there's a lot of petals in here, but for the most part, it's a pretty easy image to color in. So I am using a variety of yellows today in my Copic markers, starting with Y38, and I started towards the center of the flower and just flicked the color out a little bit. Then I came in with Y19, Y15, and Y11 I will be putting on the very tips of the petals. So with no line coloring, you can see as I'm coloring it, the lines from the ink that I stamped are kind of disappearing. It is a very artsy look to me. That's how I look at it. And I'm going to use the same process through the rest of the petals. I kind of give a little bit of an outline with my darkest color, which is Y38, and then just continue to blend out. Now, a couple things I would probably change if I were to color this again is I would probably stamp this in Crunchy Leaf ink, which is also alcohol marker friendly ink. To me, that's kind of a brown, and that ties in with the sunflowers a little bit better. It also might give you a little better viewing when it comes to coloring the images. The Jellyfish, even though I stamped it 3 times, is pretty light. I'm still really happy with my results, but I'm thinking I probably would have went with Crunchy Leaf if I were to do this again. So I am continuing to go around the entire sunflower doing the same process. So I did a lot of that off screen, but I am going to show you when I colored the inside. And for that, I am using E37, 35, and 33. I just picked one side of the sunflowers to add that darkest shade to, and then blended out with the remaining colors. So this is a very fun look to give your images. I definitely suggest practicing and just keep going because the image doesn't really pull together until it is completely covered. So please just keep going. Don't get frustrated right away. Now I'm going to work on a background for my sunflowers. So I have a piece of white cardstock that is cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. And I placed this on my Make Art station that has the magnets on there that can hold my paper and my stencils down. I am using the Slimline Cloudy stencil with some merman ink and a blending brush. I really enjoy using the Slimline stencils because I can just kind of slide it over one way or the other. I can flip them, I can rotate it. So to me, I'm getting a lot more versatility out of my Slimline stencil where I can move that around and still get that great variety of poofy clouds in the background. I'm not quite sure at this point how much of the card or the background I'm going to use, so I am going to make sure I go all the way down pretty much to the bottom of the card. I am going to add some grass, but I just wasn't quite sure how big my flowers were going to be on my card front and how much space they were going to take up. Once I have all my ink blending on with my poofy clouds, I'm going to take some peacock ink and just kind of squish it down onto my work surface there. And then I'm going to spritz a little bit of water. And I'm going to add some of the liquid stardust. You want to make sure that you're shaking up your bottle of liquid stardust really well to mix that up. And I'm going to add a couple drops into my mixture there. And I'm going to put this mixture onto an acrylic block and then flick this over my background. So the further away I hold my block, the smaller the specks will be on my background. After adding all of my sparkly flicks of color to my background, I'm going to set it off on the side to dry, and I'm going to work on cutting my grass. So I am taking a piece of Cilantro cardstock with the Grassy border die, and I'm going to just cut out some. Like I said, I'm not sure how high I want it to be, so I'm going to give myself a little bit of leeway here, some wiggle room, and I'm going to hold that down with my Post-it tape so I make sure I get a straight Grassy border across my cardstock. Then I'm going to come in with Rustic Wilderness Distress Oxide ink and a blending brush, adding it kind of heavy towards the very tippy top of the blades of grass, and then just kind of slowly or lightly blending it out. I'll be using some stitched rectangle dies to die cut out my front panel. So I'm going to line the stitched rectangle up over my background. I'm going to hold it down with Post-it tape. Now, sometimes, even though I think my background is dry from those flicks of color, sometimes it's not always dry. So I'm going to take a piece of scratch paper and place that over the top to protect my cutting plates so I don't have color all over my cutting plates. Then I'm also going to take that stitched rectangle die, line it up with my grassy border, and die cut that out as well. So that way my stitched lines are cohesive across the entire background. On the stamp set, Our Friendship Grows, are some stems that you can add to your sunflowers, and I am using the solid line. There's also an outline, but I'm just going to use the solid line for it. So I lined up my grassy border towards the bottom, bringing in those sunflowers to get an idea about where I want those stems to be. I really fiddled with these stems. They were kind of tricky. It would probably be easier to just use an acrylic block and stamp them down, but I was really worried they wouldn't stamp well right away, so I wanted to make sure I'd be able to double stamp if I needed to. Fortunately, I did not need double stamp them, but I always get kind of nervous when I have solid lines like this. And those stems were all stamped in the jalapeno ink. Now I'm going to add a sentiment, and I am going to be doing this right on top of that grassy border that I die cut. So I prepped it with an anti-static powder tool, and I am using a sentiment off of the Happy Hugs stamp set. I'm stamping that in the Embossing and Watermark ink, and then I'm going to sprinkle on white embossing powder. And off on the side, I have my heat tool warming up so it's really nice and hot, and it will melt my embossing powder quickly. Now for my actual card front, I am using a card base that's going to be an A2 size, so 4¼ by 5½, that is already scored, and I'm adding a piece of Perfectly Plaid Remix pattern paper on top of that using my tape runner. I also have a piece of white cardstock here that I'm adding on top. I want to add my grassy border to the front of my ink blended panel before I attach it to the actual card front. Just in case anything overhangs, I can still trim that off. So I put a little bit of foam tape behind my grassy border and added that to the front. And then I can attach my sunflowers. So the big one is going to be in the back. So I just added that with the tape runner. And then I'm adding foam squares behind the two smaller ones. And once I remove the backing of those foam squares, I can attach those over front of that large one in the back. Then I can add tape runner to the back of this panel and attach it to the front of my card. So I really like that white border kind of in between my blended panel and that plaid background. I think it just really helps separate the two. And if you look at the stamp set, there are dots, the little white dots that are on the sunflowers. And of course, you can see mine were gone because of the no line coloring. So I pulled the stamp over off on the side, and I'm looking at it to be able to place those dots back in. And I'm just using a white Jelly Roll pen to add those in. They don't have to be perfectly placed. I just kind of wanted to be similar to what the stamp set had shown. So that finishes off my no line coloring project for you today. I hope this has inspired you and you were able to get some tips and tricks for no line coloring. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again soon.